I've decided to do a video every 3 days on addiction, on the myths, specifically debunking them. And today's video is going to be whether withdrawal causes heroin use. Heroin withdrawal causes heroin use. And let me start out by saying the answer to that question is no. In a word, it doesn't. But there's a caveat. If you believe it does, it does. So, but from a factual point, does it pharmacologically cause somebody to use? The answer is no. And I'm driving in a snowstorm, so if you hear the noise, that's snow hitting the tires. There's an easy way to debunk this myth, and it's through the use of a control group. We have a control group that proves the point that withdrawal does not cause people to use substances, but that the belief that it does is what causes substance use. The control group is, in the last 100 years, since the invention of the hypodermic needle, we have people who, I'll just go through the example. We have people that, let's say a woman gets in a car accident, a very serious car accident, and she breaks a bunch of bones. She needs facial reconstruction surgery. She has internal injuries. So she's in the ICU for, let's say, 3 to 4 weeks. And in that time, they put a needle in her arm, no different than a user on the street, and they do a dilaudid or morphine drip for weeks on end, 24/7, to curb the pain of her injuries. And it's a massive dose because it's got her just about knocked out. Her body builds the tolerance, so they have to keep upping the dosage, just like a person in the street. Except in this case, she's using dilaudid, which is even more powerful than street heroin, and morphine. And let's say this accident happened 35 to 40 years ago, before we had heroin awareness, addiction awareness, and before we promoted myths of the powers of drugs, which will be a subject of another video. But let's just stick to this topic because it's a very succinct example that disproves the theory that the treatment industry promotes, that heroin withdrawal causes people to continue use. It might be a reason for them to use, but it doesn't cause them to use. So she has this drip for 4 weeks, and a few days before her injuries start healing, she has her last surgery. They keep her on the dilaudid right up until about 24 hours before she's let go, and they give her a script of painkillers, maybe Lortab, maybe Vicodin, who knows, whatever it might be. She hates the feeling of being high because she's been bedridden for 4 weeks. So she goes home and she doesn't take the pills. Nobody told her about physical dependency because 40 years ago nobody cared. And it was probably a good thing. Now this is why it was a good thing. She gets home and she gets a flu. For 3 days, she gets diarrhea. She vomits. She has cold chills. She says, my God, I just get out of the hospital. I just start feeling good, and I get the flu. I hate these hospitals. They're so dirty. I probably caught it in the hospital. Ironically, she did catch it in the hospital by taking dilaudid intravenously for a month. So, but here's the issue. She doesn't frame in her mind that she is dependent on anything because nobody taught her that. Yet, she's more dependent than the average street junkie. This is important. Physically, pharmacologically, she's just as addicted, quote unquote, as anybody on the street. But because nobody told her she was, she simply sees it and frames it as a flu. Because in actuality, what withdrawal is not craving. Craving is of the mind to the person that likes heroin. She doesn't crave it because she doesn't like the feeling. Okay? But she doesn't frame withdrawal as addiction. Therefore, she's not addicted. Therefore, she moves on with her life. She has no idea she was ever dependent. She has no idea she even had withdrawal. She thought she had the flu. Now, this isn't a rare occurrence. This has happened millions of times in hospitals across the globe for 100 years intravenously. Now, let's parlay that over to the user in the street who's taught to frame it as addiction. Okay? They feel they're addicted. They're physically dependent. Think about that word, right? Words matter. They say you are addicted with all the baggage of that. Nobody really has a definition of that, but we all know that it's you can't stop, right? That's the common terminology or belief. You can't stop. And so what happens is the junkies talk, the treatment industry absolutely wants to fear you into stopping, so they say these drugs have power. Withdrawal is too much. It's just too much for you. So they put you on the new religion, which is Suboxone, methadone, whatever it might be, which keeps you in the trap because it's framed as an addiction. It's framed as withdrawal will cause you to use because you're too weak to stop. It's not a matter of weakness. It's a matter of understanding that you have preferences and you might not like getting high. Most people don't. Even those IV users, 95% of them will stop whether treated or not when you factor in age. I keep going over that statistic because it's so very important. So there's so much mythology wrapped around this withdrawal belief that it causes addiction. It doesn't, but it does when you believe it to be true. And it's furthered by this idea of weakness. You're not weak. You either prefer it or you don't, but you're afraid to say that because junkies are looked down upon. So it's really important to understand that our beliefs are what are driving this. I've often said that heroin awareness in this framing is dangerous. It teaches people a myth that they're weak. I've never met a heroin user that was weak. They are strong, they know how to get high, they're very good at it. The amount of energy and free will and choice that goes into their habit is astounding. I know because I did it with drinking. It takes a lot to live those two lives, one that's tearing you down and one that's keeping you going. They're not weak people. It's not a matter of weakness. It's a matter of choice, what you prefer, and the risks you're willing to take. All substance use has risk. And today with fentanyl, what's killing kids is fentanyl. It's not knowing what they're getting. Most junkies, I don't even like that term, but I'm using it because that's the common term, are very good at getting high. They know how to do it. I'm not looking into the camera much because the roads aren't the best. So it's very important to know that our beliefs are what guide how we use substances, why we use them, our reasons for use. Now, I want to talk about causes versus reasons. You're not caused to use by withdrawal, but it may become a reason to use because you don't like withdrawal. Some people aren't willing to go through 72 hours of a flu. So one group of people will go to detox and make it easier on themselves, which is the proper use of Suboxone and other drugs like that. They wean you down in 72 hours, 4 days, you're done. And it's relatively easy in a detox. Or they choose not to use, but some people like to get high. They just like it. And they also, let's say they don't like getting high as much anymore. It doesn't bring them the joy they once found. Their preferences are changing, but they don't like withdrawal, and they'd rather avoid withdrawal, so it becomes a reason to continue getting high, and they're in that cycle. That's usually right before people quit for good. They get in that cycle for a while, and then they realize that the 3 days of having a flu is worth being free forever. That's what that 96% of people represents. There's very few people that are lifetime users. So it's really important. You're not caused to use unless you believe you are. And try to remember that over the last 100 years, tens of millions of people have left hospitals fully, quote-unquote, dependent and simply moved on because they didn't know any better. Think about that. That's how easy it is. If you don't know you're addicted, you're not. That's how much of a belief it is. So I hope this gave you a completely different way of seeing things. And we cover all of this in the Freedom Model for Addictions book. So in much more detail, actually. There's a lot of nuance throughout that whole argument. And you'll be able to read about all of that. So I hope that you found this helpful. Take care.